Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 921 for February 2nd, 2022. It's Groundhog Day, gang, and whether I see my shadow or not, we're getting at least 6 more weeks of WhiskyCast. Just kidding, of course. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. After 16 years, what else could I do that would be more fun than this? Especially when we have happy hour live webcasts like the one last Friday night with Maggie Kimberl of American Whiskey Magazine and Clay Risen of the New York Times. I've got to be honest with you, we went off the rails and all over the place the other night, and it was a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy listening to our conversation now. And a reminder, the streaming service we use to deliver our live webcasts to YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch at the same time places a priority on video quality instead of the audio, so you will hear an occasional audio glitch or two. You will also hear a few words, mostly from Maggie, that are not appropriate for younger listeners or those with tender ears. So this episode might not be one you want to listen to at work or with kids in the car. Thanks as always to our presenting sponsors of WhiskyCast, Dewar's and Redbreast, for making our live webcasts possible each week, along with the segment sponsors on our weekly WhiskyCast podcasts, Sagamore Spirit, The Dalmore, Writer's Tears, Mortlock, Scarabus, and Catoctin Creek.
I love this comment just off the top from Texas Clapsaddle. That music, it means joy is arriving. It's Friday afternoon, gang. Hope you got through the week okay. It is a cold, chilly, waiting for the snow type afternoon here in New Jersey. A little bit of snow this morning. We are waiting for this big freaking storm to come and hit us with either 2 inches or 2 feet of snow. We don't know which one, right, Clay?
Yeah, I mean, we're anywhere between, over here in Brooklyn, anywhere between 6 and 18 is what they're telling us. So I don't know,
Remember when they used to be able to give you, okay, we're going to get 5 to 7, and then you might get 2, you might get 12, but everybody figured, okay, they don't have it exact. Now we're going to get between 2 and 14 inches of snow. Lovely.
I mean, they're probably right.
Yeah, we're going to get something.
We got 16 inches of snow one time in Kentucky back when I was in high school, and it literally shut the city down. It was bad.
I remember the infamous blizzard of 1978 in Indiana where we got snowed in for like 3 days at home because we had like 2 feet of snow on the ground, and it was just. And then I think about my days in Alaska, and I'm going, you wusses, come on.
Oh, man. When my sister lived in Alaska, she had heaters in her roof so that the weight of the snow wouldn't collapse her roof.
Yeah. And we used to plug in the cars in the middle of the winter just to keep the engine oil warm so that the thing would turn over when it got really cold.
Wow. Well, I remember in Nashville, we'd get an inch of snow and it would shut down the city.
Gosh.
So I don't know what that says about Nashville.
Well, I hope everybody got their milk, eggs, and bread and whiskey.
And beer.
Yeah. I'm okay on the whiskey.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I'm plenty stocked up here, so.
Yeah.
And I'm actually soloing this entire weekend because the boss is with her aunt down in Tennessee, visited at Knoxville after her aunt had hip surgery.
Wow.
So I've got the dog sleeping off to my right here, and I'm hoping he doesn't start barking because I don't have anybody to keep him under control if he decides to start raising hell.
I made the mistake of letting my cat fall asleep in my office the other day and got on a Zoom call, and then he immediately started climbing the curtains behind me here. And I was just like, I'm sorry, my cat has decided to climb the curtains. That's just what's happening right now.
Now,
hey, that's 2022.
Exactly.
Bill Ricker, who lives in Boston and thus has no room to talk about any of this, says what it says about Nashville is they don't get snow often enough to have a fleet of plows and sanders.
No, that's true.
Watchman 99 in Vancouver, BC, just saying snow makes people clear the shelves.
Mm-hmm.
And Tabitha Spirit Bomb wants to know, what is the freezing point of whiskey?
It's
Good
pretty
question.
low.
I'm not
That's
sure.
why they use it for antifreeze, right? That's why they're using ethanol for antifreeze during the war effort.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
I mean, heck, we can Google that. Let me work the Google machine here.
You work the Google machine. Clay, what's in your glass right now?
I have a Knob Creek barrel pick from State Line Liquors down in they're on the state line. They're in Elkton, Delaware. They're
Maryland.
right on the line between Elkton, Maryland, but right on the Maryland-Delaware border. It's a great store.
Yeah.
They've always got some good barrel picks, so I always stop there. I go down to D.C. a lot and picked up this Knob Creek. It's delicious.
You are going to scream when you hear this. I actually got a scoop for you. I was talking with Eric Gregory today from the Kentucky Distillers Association. They are on probation. Everybody in Kentucky is on probation right now with the, essentially, using that term loosely, with the Alcohol Beverage Control Board, because they did some checking and they found the state regulations, as currently written, make barrel picks illegal.
In Kentucky.
For the distillers there, because it violates, if you're going down to pick a barrel, you're violating the sampling limit that they have in their tasting room. You're also violating the amount you can buy in any one day because of the limits they have on the gift shop. And what's worse, the technical part of this, it violates the tied house rules in Kentucky.
Oh.
For giving favors to a specific liquor store. So basically, the ABC board has given everybody sort of the green light to go as is until the end of the legislative session. And they're going to give the legislature a chance to fix this.
Wow.
They better, because everybody else is going to do barrel picks. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what other states require.
I'm writing this up for the website, and we'll have it on the podcast this weekend. But I talked with Chris Zaborowski at Westport Whiskey and Wine in Louisville. They do 60 barrel picks a year.
Yeah.
And if you figure they make about $8,000 off of each barrel in terms of what they sell, the retail price, that's almost $500,000 in barrel sales or barrel pick sales just at that one store.
And if you're a distillery, I mean, I love Knob Creek, regular Knob Creek, but I know a lot of people who just kind of pass it over. But what a great advertisement for the Knob Creek brand, right? I mean, I know a lot of people who love Knob Creek barrel picks. That's a thing. They don't necessarily like Knob Creek, but they love the barrel picks for whatever reason. They're delicious. That is a great way to elevate a brand, to have a barrel select program. And man, if I were the KDA right now, I'd be on fire.
They are panicking.
Good.
It is their number 2 priority behind getting the barrel taxes repealed once and for all. But they've been trying that for years, but this is emergencies legislation. But to be fair, they also have the lobbyists for the wholesalers and the retailers on board. Everybody wants this fixed, and the state knows they have to fix it.
Yeah, I don't know.
So, Maggie, what did you find on Google? People are coming up with their own Google results.
And this looks right. So, Sam Spears says -17 for 40% ABV. I found for 60% ABV is a freezing point of -21 Fahrenheit or -6 Celsius. And I don't know what, I'm pretty sure that did say -21, not 21. Oh, it does say 21. That can't be right.
No. That can't be right. And it's -27 Celsius, apparently, according to Watchman 999, who is in Canada and knows about all things Celsius. And as Bill Ricker points out, cask strength would be even lower.
Right.
Of course.
Right. Yeah. So it's low. Yeah. And that's why they use it for antifreeze.
So one other bit of news out of bourbon country. Wes Henderson's retiring.
I saw that.
What a shocker.
Well, I mean, I think he's about due, right? I mean, he's been building this brand for what, 10 or 12 years?
13 years as of this year, yeah.
So, I mean, that's a lot of work to put in addition to being a volunteer firefighter, which he has been the entire time. So it makes sense. I mean, he's raised his family, he's had his career, and now he should enjoy some time to himself. He'll get bored and come back immediately, I'm sure. That's just how it seems to go.
And it's his career.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a whole career behind that or before that, and now he did Angel's Envy, and what a success. Absolutely. He deserves it.
Yeah, and from what I understand, his son Kyle just had a grandkid for
so I think that's
Wes and his wife.
I think that's the second
That's
one,
the reason.
Right?
Yeah.
So they have.
So he wants to spend time
Right.
with the kids.
Makes sense. I'm sure he'll still be at the distillery.
I made the joke on Twitter today that he's actually going to replace Chris Mack as the Louisville basketball coach, but
Somebody needs.
the timing was just coincidence, but I ought to get slapped for that one. So let's talk about what you guys have both been working on.
Oh, can I talk about
Clay,
what
let's
I'm
talk-
drinking first?
Well, I'm sorry. I forgot,
Yeah,
Maggie. I'm sorry.
that's
Of course.
okay.
Go right ahead.
So I'm drinking an Old Dominic R&D batch called All the Cookies Bourbon. And this is a bourbon that Alex Castle made and finished in an oak beer barrel. And it literally smells like raisins. It smells like oatmeal raisin cookies. It's pretty amazing. So this is what I'm working on right now.
Ooh. I was just eating some Girl Scout cookies and pairing them with this Scarabus 10-year-old Isla malt from our sponsors at Hunter Lang and Company earlier.
Which cookie went
Girl
the
Scout
best
cookies
with
have been
that?
put away. I am impressed with those toast jays. I don't know if you guys have them in Louisville or not, but
they
they're
just
these
started this
French
year.
toast-like cinnamon things. Yeah. I was impressed with it. The cinnamon and the cookie matches up nicely with the peat.
Interesting. I'll have to give that a try.
I can see that.
Yeah, I was surprised. Caramel Delights go really well with bourbons. The old Samoas, they used to call them, go really well with bourbons. I expected Thin Mints to go better with some whiskeys, but they didn't go as well as I thought they would.
Too minty, or
yeah,
why?
The mint overpowers a lot of the delicate flavors, I think.
Did you try it with a rye whiskey?
See that.
I have not yet, but I've got to experiment with that, with some Irish, with some Canadian, a little bit of everything.
That's important research.
Oh, yes.
These
inquiring minds want to know.
No joke.
This may get me a Nobel Prize at some point if we do this research right.
We'll do what we can to pressure them.
Of course.
I'm sure between Maggie and I,
we have a lot of pull, with like 5 people on Twitter.
Yep. Okay. So, Clay, let's talk about this piece you did for the Times on counterfeit bourbons. That $1,000 bourbon you're buying may be a fake, and it may be a $69.99 bourbon that they're selling for $1,000, depending on who's doing the selling. But interesting concept that bourbon has now become counterfeitable and profitable to fake, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and so rapidly that I think it's caught a lot of people by surprise. I mean, in some ways, it's not surprising, right? I mean, anytime you get a rapidly rapidly rising value in an asset that people don't know much about outside of a core group of collectors, you're hanging out a sign for scammers to come along, especially when there's not a lot of when you have this secondary market, which is we call it a gray market. It's a black market. And so there's no enforcement mechanism outside of the other people who, could ostracize you, which if you're a scammer is not much of a price to pay. And the upside is huge. It's surprising to talk about, but actually as a concept, it's completely predictable. And
go ahead and finish up.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, it's something that it was an article that I've wanted to write for a while, just because, probably the last 5 years, been hearing little stories, conversations with people. I'd hear about one trade or another, someone getting scammed. And then there was this story out of the Acker, the wine store in New York, that was earlier last year. And, it just felt by the fall that this was a good time to talk about this thing, especially because I think it's something that is both a problem now and is only going to get worse. And so my thinking was, almost as a service to some extent, was to start to talk about this now and to get it out there, to make people aware of this possibility and just get folks paying a little more attention to what they're buying.
I was talking with Adam Hertz, who you also interviewed for your story, and I think it's amazing to see that there are people who will spend $300 for an empty Van Winkle bottle on eBay. because they know they can then take that bottle, fill it up, get a fake capsule, put it over the top, and cork it off and sell that thing for as much as they can get for it.
Yeah, and what? Increasingly, it's more than Van Winkle. I'm actually surprised that it's only at the super high end luxury level, which, if you think about it, is a good thing because it means that there isn't a lot of scale involved. These are individual people who know that the low hanging fruit is Van Winkle, maybe some Willets. If they really know the market, they're going to go out and target that really small audience that knows the value of a Willet, of certain Willets, some Michters, some other things, Stag. But I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't gotten into the somewhat more, higher volume, somewhat low, still expensive.
It certainly has outside of the United States. I mean, we all remember that resort in the Dominican Republic a couple of years ago that had a bunch of people who were poisoned, and it ended up being counterfeit low-end, bar shelf spirits that was causing that. Yeah.
Well, and I'm talking to Adam and other folks about the international scene. Counterfeit Scotch is, especially blended Scotch, is just a thing. And if you go to parts of the world where, you walk into a bar and they're going to have Jimmy Walker, they're going to have, Cuddy Stark, brands that they're not
like a Molex
fakes, but exactly. And that's just common. And so it's a little surprising that we don't have that here. And I think, honestly, again, I think we could be on the cusp of that. It could be just, it takes a little while. And one of the things that Adam, kind of warned me about, and we had a long conversation about was, there's a paradox. The more you talk about it, the more ideas you give to people.
Yeah.
And if you say, hey, it's really easy to counterfeit bourbon, there are going to be a lot of people out there who go, hey, I love the counterfeit stuff. I didn't even know that. I'm on it. There's a risk in that versus the reward of telling people that they need to look for things. So, how do you balance that?
But at the same time, I think it's, really a testament to the regulations that we have had, in the United States that prevent that very thing from happening. And consumers need to understand that as long as they are buying products through legitimate channels, there's not a whole lot that they have to worry about there. There will always still be those disreputable, liquor store owners who are taking in something that either they know or don't know is counterfeit. Hey, Steve, I see Steve Bayshore.
Yeah.
But really, if you're going into your corner liquor store and you're buying, a handle of the same thing the same, Jim Beam white label that you've had, there's a very low risk associated with that. It's when you get into the collector space that it really becomes problematic because you don't have that chain of ownership that is proven. And, there's a lot of money involved in the 3-tier system as much as people like to knock it. But that 3-tier system really provides a lot of safeguards for people to ensure that they're getting a safe product.
Yeah.
And it's not that I would make this necessarily, but it is the case for control states. You won't talk about the ultimate guarantee, presumably, is those control states. And also if you can get the bottles, they're going to sell them at a pretty good price. So, there's a case for that. But you're absolutely right. And it's, in some ways it's a rich person's problem. Mm-hmm. If you can afford, if you're out there buying $1,000 bottles of whiskey, you're not exactly a man of the people.
And
it's a rich and dumb people's problem.
Sure. And how many of those are ever actually going to get cracked open? I mean, that's the thing, because it's something that's supposed to be a trophy that sits on your shelf. And then, presumably it holds value or goes up in value and you can sell it again later. At what point does somebody actually open it? And is there actually a safety risk there? I like to think probably not so much.
Yeah. No, I think that's in some ways, and I didn't say this in the article, but in some ways that's the ultimate indictment of that level of connoisseurship, not of collectorship. connoisseurship implies that people know what they're drinking, right? And obviously we know that even in a world where people would open the bottles, they wouldn't necessarily know one from another, but you would think there would be more of that, right? But how many people out there, how many owners of bottles of George T. Stagg actually know what George T. Stagg tastes like?
That's a great point.
I'd say it's because they buy those bottles and they resell them, or they just stick them on their shelves. And that's, again, that's just prime territory for scammers to come along, because they know there's a lower chance that they'll get caught.
We have a good question from Chris Ratcliffe, and I pulled it up just a second here. Let me go back to it. The more advanced closures that Buffalo Trace are investigating that actually have things like RFID tags and holograms on them, is that going to help solve some of this problem, or is it going to be mostly related from here on out to older bottles and those so-called vintage bottles that we see? What do you think?
I have an answer for that. I mean, one day today's bottles are going to be vintage, right? So, I mean, presumably that will help at some stage in the game, right? But there's still always going to be that problem of, like Clay mentioned, the bottles that are available on eBay. And one of the interesting solutions that I've seen for that is, the whiskey clubs that I'm in, particularly here in Louisville. We have a ton of whiskey clubs on Facebook, and they say, there's like a code of ethics, where when you drain a bottle, you should break it. Don't put it in the recycling bin. Don't, give it to somebody unless you know for sure that they're going to be cutting it and making a candle or something, turning it into a lamp or something like that. So there's like a code of ethics among whiskey geeks now where, they're trying to do a little vigilantism here to make sure that this problem does not, persist.
We haven't.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
I mean, the thing with the Buffalo Trace technology, it remains to be seen. They've been incredibly tight-lipped on what it actually is. In some ways, it's kind of like I thought of it as like the monolith at the beginning of 2001. I don't know. What is it? Nobody knows. They won't tell us. It's only in bottles of Handy. So it's not in everything they make. It's not even across the antique collection. It's kind of, to me personally, I think it's too complicated of a process. All you have to do, and a number of distilleries in Scotland are working on this, where you just put like a QR code on the bottle, or you put something that is readily scannable, where everybody can literally go if they're in a store or they're in a swap meet. They can go up to the bottle and scan it with their phone and say, "Oh, that bottle, was purchased by there's a chain of ownership." The RFID code tags, I suspect, and I think that's actually for some other purpose. Tracking consumer behavior. But who knows? Buffalo Trace won't tell us.
They wouldn't track our behavior once the bottle gets in our house, would they?
RFID is a poor way to do that, though, right? Because you have to be within proximity of that scanner to know where that bottle is traveling, right? It's not like it's not like the 5G chips that we all got in our vaccines, right?
Mm-hmm. Which I'm
right?
loving.
I get great cell reception.
I have a question for both of you, though.
Sure.
Do you I'm hearing a lot of people say that NFTs and the blockchain is a possible solution to this problem, and I want to hear what you all have to say about that.
God.
Maybe? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I still have to get my head wrapped around blockchain.
Okay, so there's a particular brand of scotch that is releasing an NFT bottle of scotch. And all these bottles of scotch are going to be locked in a safe house in, I believe, Singapore. And then you get the NFT that says that you own that. And people seem to think that that is going to stop any sort of counterfeiting or, chain of ownership problems. And my question is, what is to stop me from going into that house in Singapore and saying, look over there, and taking that bottle of scotch and replacing it with another one?
Yeah.
The hell with that. If I'm spending that much money on a bottle of scotch, I want the damn bottle. I don't want a picture of the bottle that says I own it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know. I say this as someone who really is pretty ignorant as far as how all of that technology works, but from what I know, my takeaway assumption is, NFTs, the blockchain so far are technologies in search of a problem to solve. They don't make banking easier. They actually are pretty terrible for banking. And the environment. They don't store data. So a lot of times, they are reference points for something else, either another, a digital property that exists somewhere else or a physical property. And at that point, I don't know, Maggie, like you said, I don't know. There are ways, there are pretty analog ways to get around whatever the solution is. So I don't know. And maybe someone could come along and say, no, Clay, this is how it works. And I would be persuaded. But so far, it just sounds to me like those are just things people are saying because they are trendy.
I've had a lot of people say, no, this is how it works. And then I go, yeah, no, that doesn't track. I'm sorry. It's interesting. I think probably eventually that technology will find, a place. But I think that whiskey is definitely not it.
Spirit Bomb has, I think, a tongue-in-cheek suggestion. We need bottles that explode once you've emptied it. I think...
Have 15 seconds to put it in your recycling bin. That would really help you tidy up, right?
This will self-destruct in 15 seconds.
I have a feeling that could probably cause more problems with glass damage than it would work.
Yeah, you don't need a bunch of drunk people slicing their hands open.
Sober.
And I love this comment from Dave Kuhn, who is vacationing in Aruba.
Oh, poor Dave.
Dave. Whiskey should remain an analog experiential product. Hell yes.
Cheers to that.
We don't need to digitize our whiskey.
It is the most frustrating thing to see those two things bump up against each other, because whiskey is fundamentally an experiential thing, and yet people want it to be otherwise. Oh,
I got to share this with you. Dave Kuhn also says, can you imagine trying to explain NFT whiskey to Ian MacArthur, our buddy at Lagavulin?
Yeah.
I would pay to see that. Can we make that a pay-per-view event?
I agree with you. I would pay to see that too, because Ian would shut that down in about 2 seconds. It's the biggest amount of bullshit he'd ever seen. Well, speaking of scams, let's go to the other side of the criminal thing now, because Maggie, you had some fun comments on Facebook the other day about the George Remus brand. And this is one of those whiskeys that comes from MGP that they bottle and they do make themselves. It's one of their house brands now.
They didn't start it.
But
they bought the
They didn't start it. They bought it. The guys that started the brand bought their whiskey from MGP, and they liked the brand so much for some stupid reason that they bought it.
Yeah, and so, this is something that I have found problematic since before MGP owned it, when the George Remus brand actually launched. I remember having a conversation with somebody all those years ago and saying, he killed his wife, right? And they were like, yeah, that'll never come up. And I was just like, well, I don't know if that's really the direction to go. Good luck. And so, when MGP bought this, I was really surprised because, MGP is a huge company, right? They make a lot of whiskey. They're behind a lot of brands. And it was surprising to see them put their, market capital behind a guy who essentially murdered his wife. Didn't essentially, but he did. He chased her down in broad daylight, murdered her in the middle of the street because she, slept with the FBI agent that put him away and cleaned out their house. And, they were on the way to the courthouse to finalize their divorce, and he chased her down and killed her in the middle of the street. And then
got off for not guilty by reason of insanity.
Right, he was the first person to successfully plead temporary insanity. So he did not do time. He did not go to any sort of institution. He just went on living his life after that. And, it wasn't a great life by many accounts, but, that still is not really a life that we want to honor. And the main problem that I have with this brand is And the post that I made on Facebook was I was scrolling through Facebook one night and I came across, somebody talking about George Remus in one of the many, many Facebook groups that I'm in. And, just scrolling through the comments, it was, hey, one guy says to the original poster, hey, he killed his wife, right? And then somebody else chimes in and does the whole like bitch had it coming story. And then everybody starts laughing at that. And I was just like, that's really problematic, and especially in this day and age when we're trying to be more sensitive to, domestic violence and there's been the Me Too movement and all that sort of thing. And we're really kind of tuned into, the horrors that are out there. The notion that it's okay to say stuff like that and to have a brand associated with that is really problematic, and it's concerning. And my main concern is, all these people who say these things, they're always men. And, when they say these things, there are women watching, and the women watching know that those are not safe men when they say things like that. And so, it's extremely problematic for a lot of reasons, but the main reason being, why are we glorifying a wife murderer? For whatever reason that, they felt that she deserved it. Extrajudicial murders are not a remedy for, infidelity or, stealing a guy's toilet. So, it's problematic. So, and then that kind of sent me down a rabbit hole. I got another brand, Clyde Mays, which is
out of Alabama.
They're building a distillery in Troy, Alabama right now, which is, really great, good for them. But it's another one. I was like, oh, who's Clyde May? This shit again. So,
yep.
I don't understand, and I want somebody to explain it to me like I'm in kindergarten. Mark, go.
You're asking me? I mean, we've been naming whiskeys after assholes for years.
Yeah. And I mean, Al Capone had syphilis so bad he was fishing out of his swimming pool. Why are we glorifying that motherfucker? So I don't get it. And I would like somebody seriously to explain it to me like I'm in kindergarten.
Well, what?
Explain why they're glorifying Clyde May?
Or any of these guys. These are not,
I don't know.
Nice guys.
I think because, cynically, and not to justify, but because there are people like the ones you encountered out there for whom the story, as terrible as it is a marketing plus. So, which is terrible, but there's a certain population that's going to say George Remus is a badass, and they're going to buy the whiskey for that reason. And not enough people, and to your credit, hopefully this changes, but not enough people who take the opposite, who know enough to take the opposite position, right? To say, no, this guy's terrible, and do you know why? Because he killed his wife. Evan Williams, or Elijah Craig, he was a slave owner. Did you know that? Let's talk about that, right? These are things that people don't now, and to their credit, Elijah Craig, I don't know.
As was Evan Williams.
Right, as is Evan Williams. I mean, I don't, not to diminish that at all, but, that was kind of, those names have been around, those brands have been around for a while before people, what surprises me, what is kind of gobsmacking to me is that the Remus brand is not that old. And MVP bought this brand knowing full well that this is what this guy did, and this is the environment.
The George Remus brand is not even in middle school yet.
Yeah, we're gonna put all of our money behind a guy who is the poster child for all the things that people today recognize as being terrible. What were they like? Who were the people in there who said, actually, that's a great idea. Let's, of all the names, real and fictional, that we could put our money behind, let's do that guy.
And I do want to interject at this point, because this is something I've given a tremendous amount of thought to. I do not believe that a bunch of people were sitting around in a boardroom saying, "Oh yeah, George Remus, he murdered his wife. Let's name a bourbon after him. That's great. Yeah, all these guys will spend their money on it because they hate women." Like, I don't believe that is what happened. But what I see over and over again in this industry is a lack of equity and inclusion. That's another thing that we're hearing a lot about now is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when you have a boardroom where it's overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male, and anybody who does not fit that description is too new to jeopardize their position by speaking up and saying something is a bad idea, that's not a healthy, business environment. You have to have a business environment in which somebody can say, "That's a really fucked up idea, guys," and challenge that and say, "Why don't we have a conversation about this before we take this whole brand to market?"
Yeah, you would not go and say, "Let's sell an O.J. Simpson bourbon."
Exactly.
For crying out loud.
No, and look, I joke, but the amount of ignorance that it takes and the amount of, however those people thought through this, clearly there was nobody that said this is a terrible idea.
I did.
And, you did. No one in the room.
Numerous occasions to seemingly the right people. So
yeah. No, it's astounding, but obviously it happened.
I will admit that I raised this issue in 2018 during a press trip, a visit to MGP, where they were showing off the brand, and they sort of hemmed and hawed about it. And then 2 years ago, when Karen Abbott did her book on the biography of George Remus, I asked them again for a comment. We actually I pulled the statement that they gave us back then, so I've got that to share with you, just so we get both sides, or get their side of the story in. This is from MGP's vice president of brands at the time, Andy Mancini. George Remus bourbons are named for a very important and controversial figure in American whiskey history. George Remus, the king of the bootleggers, was deeply flawed and had to answer for many misdeeds in his lifetime. When we purchased the brand from Queen City Whiskey Company, we chose to maintain the continuity of the brand name as a link between the Prohibition era and our own. We don't celebrate his deeds, but we are part of the spirit's legacy he embodied. I don't.
So
that strikes me as
most of his misdeeds, like the most heinous of the misdeeds. I would argue that he did not answer for that. I mean, yes, he did a lot of time in prison. That's how we know he was, a criminal. So.
And that was all for the bootlegging and the prohibition stuff, not for shooting his wife.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and I think anyone who says we're going to celebrate, let's take him at his word and set aside, and just because he seems to be ignoring the murder part, let's set that aside and say, oh, you're celebrating him as a bootlegger. But I don't know, are those people that we should be celebrating? I mean, it's one thing to glorify moonshiners up in the holler who are just making moonshine but another thing to celebrate gangsters. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's a certain coolness around it, I guess. But at the same time, there be dragons.
Sure.
And as soon as you say, let's celebrate hardened criminals.
And really, it goes back to this issue of counterfeiting fake whiskey, unsafe whiskey, because when you're talking about people who are bootlegging, these are people who murdered the federal agents who were in charge of making sure that consumers had access to safe whiskey. Of course, it was going on during Prohibition. And, I think one of the main takeaways I think that we learned as a nation from Prohibition is you can't actually prohibit people from having access to a product that they want. And it turned a lot of, otherwise, law-abiding people into criminals. So, it's understandable that happened. But, when you look at the history of safety in the whiskey industry, the bootleggers are the people who were, maybe the reason that we had all those regulations to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's like we bought the URL, so we're sticking with it, Dave Kuhn says. I like that. Yeah. That is hilarious. I mean, URLs redirect, guys, just saying.
Yep. Yeah, let's just call it what it is, wife killer whiskey.
Yeah.
Yeah. maybe I'm way too conservative in when I imagine myself as a marketer, but like I would just go with a brand that didn't have controversy attached to it.
Yeah.
It would have been great to buy the Queen City whiskey name for that matter. I mean, I think that would be a great name for a bourbon. And there's certainly, going to be people who say, well, Cincinnati is this and Cincinnati has a history of this, but it's not the same connotation as a single individual who, really committed these heinous crimes.
And
yeah.
I want to share this comment from Tabitha because this is just sort of gobsmacks me. Again, seeing as how there were multiple men-only pubs in Scotland up until the 1980s, it doesn't surprise her that, as Graham Fraser pointed out, he found some Clyde Mays bourbon in the pot still in Glasgow, and she went back and researched it. Up until 1982, it was perfectly legal to refuse to serve women in British pubs, which were traditionally male environments.
We had the same thing in Kentucky. It was illegal for women to be bartenders or to be seated at the bar in bars in Kentucky until, I believe, 1976. I went and did an interview with some of the officers at our state liquor control board in Frankfurt a few years back, and they had an actual citation framed on the wall for a woman who got a ticket for being a bartender. That these kinds of laws existed all over the place for a very long time. There's always been misogyny, associated with, beverage alcohol. And that's not surprising because there's a lot of misogyny associated with a lot of things. But that does not surprise me one bit. And, I want to take a minute here to plug Mallory O'Meara. She recently published a book called Girly Drinks, which I almost didn't read because I thought the title was so ridiculous. And I'm glad that I did read it because she covers a lot of this in her book. So, if this is the kind of history that you want to learn about, Mallory O'Meara's Girly Drinks is a great resource for that.
I will second that and give you another one because I've been meaning to have Tara Niren, who lives literally 5 miles from here. And before I had the concussion, I was going to have her on the show. Her newest book is A Woman's Places in the Brew House, where she talks about the whole history of women in brewing and does the same thing and talks about the misogyny there. And I'm wondering, was that citation issued to Joy Perrine?
It was not. No, Joy was she was in the Caribbean somewhere at that point, I think. Because I don't think she moved back to Kentucky until probably the 80s. So I don't think she ever bartended illegally, but she definitely was bartending at a time, when it was illegal to bartend, for women to bartend in Kentucky. Absolutely. She was a trailblazer, 100%.
Oh, yeah. And I can just imagine somebody trying to write her up for illegal bartending. She would have put a boot up their butt.
I would have loved to see that on pay-per-view as well.
There's a lot of things that we need to see on pay-per-view. Question here from Pete Head. How many of the buyers of these controversial named whiskeys should really know about the controversy? Do we really ever check what a name is or what it means? And I'm assuming he's talking about the consumer side. Do we really ever even think twice before we buy a bourbon as to the past or the history of that?
I think it's becoming increasingly common, right? Because we have a huge, we've seen this resurgence of American whiskey over the last 10 years that has really been pushed forward by enthusiasts. People wanting to know more and more and more, and there's really no limit to the quest for knowledge out there. And it's a perfect example. When I got that Clyde May, I was like, hey, who's this Clyde May guy? And I go to Google and I see what I can find out about him. I think that there are a lot of consumers. I would say that not every consumer, certainly. I would say maybe more than half of whiskey consumers are interested these days in at least a little bit of information about what is in the bottle. Unless these are people who've just been drinking Jim Beam White Label for, 3 decades and just want the same thing. If you're going out and you're actively seeking out new brands and trying new brands and brands that have only been around for 10 years or 12 years or however long this one has been around, those are the people who, they actually are wanting to learn more. They want to know as much as they can.
And one of the things we've found is that people really care about the provenance of their brands and the brands they're supporting these days, especially with the, whatever you want to call it, the Generation Y, Generation Z, the 20-somethings that are now actually have a passion for making sure that brands represent their personal point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, also, Whoever goes and researches a brand, if they buy a bottle of George Remus, there's going to be a huge segment of that population that does look and see, oh, who's George Remus? Oh, he killed his wife. Well, I already like the whiskey. And the distillery is going to put a positive spin on that. It's normalizing or at least diminishing a pretty heinous crime. We can think of a lot of things, a lot of criminal categories that we would not put on, that would disqualify someone from being on a bottle of whiskey. Why is that one okay? I don't get it. And I think that MGP is complicit in normalizing and diminishing that crime. I don't. To me, it's a sort of self-evidently a bad idea.
I just take comfort in the fact that George Remus has been taking the dirt nap for a long time.
The thing I wonder about, though, is when you talk about, as you put it, that line that some guys use, I hate to use that word, but bitch had it coming.
Yeah.
Yep. What does that say when they say that in front of their sons?
Or their wives, their daughters.
Or their daughters.
What does that say when they say it in front of their wives and their daughters? I mean, that's concerning.
But I'm saying when it sons to their sons, it normalizes it for another generation.
Sure.
That's what I'm getting at, is that it makes another generation of adolescent males think that it's okay to do this shit.
Yeah.
And it's not.
I mean, it's a very middle school attitude, right? Like I remember in, probably around 6th grade being introduced to, really sexist jokes. And that's really just kind of the mindset of that age group where nothing is off limits and everything's just, funny and a joke, and there's no real meaning behind anything. And, I think that, human beings have a natural need to search for meaning in all things. And we see this especially again with whiskey geeks who want to know, it's not just the generational people who want to say, like, does this company support my values? But it's also like, does this, brand ethos align with my personal values as well? And, I just think it's really problematic.
And as Tabitha Spirit Bomb points out, they'll say boys will be boys, and alas, all too few grow up, as Bill Ricker points out rather well. I want to get back, because there was a great comment, and getting back to the blockchain stuff for a second here, sort of speaking of the whole sexism thing, Chris Radcliffe points out, NFTs are useful, but if the porn industry isn't using them, then it's not the right solution.
That's a brilliant point, because I think that, we saw a few years ago, Playboy stopped putting nudity in the magazines briefly because porn was everywhere and there's no way of controlling where it went. So it stopped being profitable for them, right? And they immediately, turned around and put it back in because they were like, hey, that's not going to work for us. But I mean, that's a really good point, that like, if the porn industry has not embraced this, then it must not actually be a solution to anything.
And as we all know, the porn industry is basically responsible for every good consumer invention of the last 30 years. The porn industry was the one who picked VHS over beta tapes back in the 70s. Yeah, well, that was because it was cheaper to duplicate VHS tapes than it was to duplicate beta tapes.
Did not know that.
I mean, that's a whole, I don't know if you watch Silicon Valley, but that's a whole plot point, is that their technology at one point, I don't know if season 2, season 3, is about to go under, and then the porn industry adopts it and they obsess over it, and suddenly it becomes the thing, and then everyone else adopts it because, if the porn industry does it, then that's the way things go. But there's a truth to that.
Because in the 70s, when Betamaxes first came out in the early 80s, Sony controlled the duplication process for beta tapes. JVC created VHS and opened it up. Basically, all you do was license the technology and license the right to create beta tapes, and you could duplicate as many VHS tapes as you wanted. Sony held a lid on who could do beta tapes, so it was easier for the porn makers to distribute VHS tapes, and that's why VHS became dominant, and why Betacam or Betamax eventually became the Betacam broadcast format.
That's amazing. You know what? We were Team Betamax at my house. So, I will repeat the oft-repeated phrase, it was better technology. That's all I have to say about that.
And as Jeff Burlatt points out, Blu-ray was the choice of porn.
Interesting.
And Bill Ricker points out, porn and Bible study were the core early adopters for CD-ROM drives for PCs also.
Well, they do go hand in hand.
So to speak.
Your words, not
and
mine.
Spirit Bomb points out, if OnlyFans isn't using it.
There you have it.
I keep thinking we ought to set up an OnlyFans account for whiskey porn.
Yeah, I mean,
just nothing but glasses, pictures of glasses and bottles.
Porn. No, we're just talking about bottles.
There are lots of taters out there who would pay for that all day.
Yeah.
And Bill Ricker makes another good point about beta versus VHS. An NFL game would fit on a VHS tape for time shifting and a whole movie at medium resolution because VHS could do 6 hours, Betacam could only do, or
2.
Betamax could only do 2. So you could put a whole football game onto one tape.
Why are football games so long? Like it's supposed. What? I don't get it. Do you have an ex? Can you?
It's a male thing. Size matters.
Okay, I'll just take your word for it.
More ads.
More
That's
ads you
what
can
it
cram
is.
in there.
That's got to be what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be because they're paying so much for the rights to those things, and live sports are the only thing that drives live viewing anymore of linear television. The old what we used to call it UHF, VHF, regular broadcast channels. Live sports is all that drives that anymore.
Wow.
Everything else is time shifted to whenever you want to watch it now.
Huh.
Yeah, drag it out.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, and as Ricker points out, Mark keeps saying Betacam when he shows he was on the content generation side. Yes, here's the difference. Betamax was the consumer format that was in the 70s. It evolved into Betacam, which became the popular format in broadcast because the Betamax quality was higher than VHS, and it was a broadcast quality that we could take out in the field and generate. Betacam camcorders were a lot easier to carry around in the field than the old.
Now we can do it on this.
Yeah. Now you can do it on that. So, and let's see. And Lil agrees with you on this one down in Australia. How does the last 2 minutes take up to 30 minutes, Maggie?
I don't know. There's a lot of standing around. There's a lot of they do one, what do they call that thing? Like first and is that a down?
The 2 minute warning?
Is that a down? Is that what that's called?
First down, yeah.
So they'll do one down and then they'll take a commercial break and then they'll come back and they'll do another down and they'll take a commercial break. And it's I think we've seen enough commercials. Can we just finish this?
Have y'all watched any basketball? Because college basketball is all about drawing out the last minute into 30 minutes. The
NBA is even worse.
I love basketball. That's my.
The NBA is unwatchable.
NBA too.
Yeah.
That we're going to take free throws. All we're going to do is just foul and free throw. That's not fun, as someone watching the game, especially when there's no chance of anything happening. But then you just wonder, is this because you think you're going to win, or because you've been told to do it so that someone gets more revenue on the ads? I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy guy, but
I have to wonder though, what is the age group of the people watching us right now while we're talking about Betamax and VHS and porn and football and George Remus? And I mean, we've got to be skewing, 55 plus, I think, right now.
I'll share this quote again from Texas Clapsaddle. This is the most broad-ranging, meaningful, weird, history-filled, informative WhiskyCast happy hour ever. Love it.
TT, we haven't even.
I know, right? Just wait until I start talking about linguistic anthropology or teaching my kids to cuss out the cat in German. We do all kinds of weird stuff.
Oh, wait a second. I got to hear this. How'd you teach your kids to cuss out the cat in German?
So I taught the kids how to say, to tell the cat he's an asshole. So, du bist ein Arschloch is you're an asshole. And then, when we're talking about the cat behind his back, die Katze ist ein Arschloch. So my kids are learning all the dirty words in other languages. I did have to warn my son this week. He got a substitute teacher who I happen to know speaks German. And so when I got the notice at home, I was like, this guy speaks German, so don't get in trouble, okay? Don't get me in trouble.
Wow. Mark, you need a minute?
No, I'm just laughing because I'm thinking that kid is going to do really well in German class in high school.
Yeah. Spot on.
Wait a second. Watchman says, "You are a milk sieve?"
Maybe my pronunciation is off. I mean, it's really difficult. And this is one of the things that I explained to the kids, because the reason we went down this rabbit hole is because, they're asking me how to say a specific curse word in another language. And I was like, well, it's not always a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Because things evolve to become, profanity for societal reasons mostly. So most of the curse words that we have in the English language are because the Norman invasion of 1066 made the official language of the government of England French. So French was the highbrow way of saying things, and then it was the commoners who would say the Saxony English version of that. So that's why we get like shit and fuck instead of like fornicate and all that kind of stuff.
I'm sharing this comment from Bill Ricker. His daughter beat the rap on swearing in high school because it was a mere vulgarity, not a swear. And then as we walked out, trailed by the English immigrant vice principal, drops a bloody in conversation. Oh, boy.
And that's funny, right? Because the swear words. So also, even when you literally translate, I mean, that's English to English or British to American. But the word, so friends of mine who are German, the swear words in German, like what counts as a swear word versus what counts as a swear word in English, it's not, even when you translate them,
is a big one.
They're not the same.
Schweinhund is a big one. Pig dog literally translates to pig dog, and that's like the worst thing that you can call someone.
Doesn't sound that bad in English, but I mean, it's cultural.
You got to admit, and I love Germany and I love my friends in Germany, but most of German, if you say it right, it sounds like you're cussing.
I argue with people about that all the time because they think it's a very harsh language, but that's just because, it's kind of been portrayed that way for a long time, especially in American media, particularly between, World War II and the end of the Cold War. But it's actually
one wonders why,
right? Yeah, I mean, we were watching Die Hard at Christmas time, and
we were watching Hogan's Heroes in the 60s and 70s for crying out loud.
But Die Hard was made in 1988, and that was before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that's why the bad guys in that movie were East Germans.
Right, they're easy bad guys. I mean, the accent, right? I don't know.
Boy, we've killed an hour that nobody's going to get back.
I'm so sorry, you guys.
This has been the most eclectic happy hour live, as Texas Clapsaddle points out, yet.
I can't believe anyone's still listening.
Oh, they're still watching, although they're not clicking the like buttons, guys.
Sorry.
Click those like buttons if you haven't yet.
Quick.
So what have you guys been drinking that you like? What's impressed you that you like these days?
Oh, I mean, to be honest, I'm sort of, as a New Yorker, I mean, this is like the kid who gets you live in a small town, you only get certain toys. So, like, oh my God, did you know I got this G.I. Joe? No, so, I mean, anytime I can get Wilderness Trail, anytime I can get New Riff, those are my jam these days. It's fantastic. I'm liking this Knob Creek. We don't get a lot of barrel picks in New York, so that's kind of painful. There are a few stores, but
your state doesn't allow it anymore.
It's weird. It's they allow, is I understand there's a way to get around it, but you got to do a hanger tag. I mean, you've got to. And no one in New York City, you can only own one liquor store. So unless you're Astor. It's really Astor Place Wine and Liquor, which great store. But But otherwise you're a mom and pop, and you can't get you don't sell the volume to get in the door to do the barrel picks that you could do if you're Total or if you're, whatever. And so it's not that fun to be in New York in that regard. But
you have great bagels.
Yeah,
we have great bagels. Anyone listening, I'll trade bagels for barrel picks.
I might take you up on that. I can hook you up.
You want Russ and Daughters? You want
H&H bagels.
Russ and Daughters down the street from me. I will go buy Russ and Daughters, salmon, whatever you want, whitefish salad. We got some great whitefish salad. I will trade that for barrel picks. DM me.
I love it.
We got a note on the comments here from our pal Steve Beal out in California. Oh. Love you guys. Steve, we love you too. Hope you're doing well, brother.
Best. We love you, man.
Yeah. Keep fighting, my friend.
So what I've been drinking recently so I have to say one of the categories,
Steve the Whiskey Cat made an appearance.
Kitty. I'm really excited about the American single malt category. And one of the reasons I think this is so exciting is because, I'm seeing a lot of distilleries from outside of Kentucky wanting to put their own mark on the distilled spirits industry, and it always, the conversation that I have over and over and over again is, we really loved Kentucky bourbon, but we can't be a Kentucky bourbon. We didn't want to try to be a Kentucky bourbon. So we just wanted to, really put our own stamp on the industry. And so we're seeing a lot of really cool regional and philosophical variations of the American single malt category. We see, aspen staves or, peachwood, cherrywood in the southeastern and in Virginia, especially at Copper Fox. Then there are the folks who are up in the Pacific Northwest who just start with a really good beer base because that is, the malt grows there. That's where it's from. There's a huge brewing. They all came from brewing backgrounds. So the folks at like Westland and Westward, they start with a really great mash and then make a really nice, clean whiskey. And, Westland has gone the peated route, which is really interesting. There are peat bogs in Canada and in the northern part of the United States, which is not something I was even aware of before that really happened.
On the Olympic Peninsula in Washington is where they're getting their peat from.
Yeah, so I mean, they're wanting to pull in those regional influences to kind of put their own stamp on the industry, and I think that's a really smart move because, I don't know that whiskey drinkers necessarily want another Kentucky bourbon or another, bourbon that is, way out from left field. There have been some really great bourbons made at these craft distilleries outside of Kentucky. Don't get me wrong. Iron Root Republic comes to mind, the Harbinger. They won World Whiskeys a few years ago. And, that was just a truly phenomenal bottle of whiskey. But I'm really excited about all these folks who are, trying to figure out what is the next step. What is the next thing that people are going to be interested in, or what is the next thing that they're going to want to try, because there are just so many great options out there.
That played perfectly into this question from Grant Fraser: is the future of U.S. whiskey single malt over bourbon? Clay, what do you think?
No. But I think there's a huge space for single malt. I think that one of the things that crystal ball, I don't know if I had to guess, over the next decade, bourbon will not be dethroned. But, there's going to be space made for, I think, a really robust rye category where people start, right now, most people by volume, they're drinking MGP, but there's a huge amount of really cool rye distilleries out there. People in Pennsylvania, Maryland, but, far north in Minnesota, folks all over the place doing cool stuff with rye. I think American single malt's the same thing. There's already all the distilleries that Maggie mentioned. More people are going to get in there because, look, at the end of the day, the big distilleries, and they're still the big distilleries, Jim Beam and Heaven Hill and Wild Turkey and Jack Daniel, they dominate the industry. You're not going to take them on. They make really good products. These are not Michelob and Anheuser-Busch. They're making great stuff. They're making great bourbon. So you need to find something else to make. And Obviously, all the distilleries that know what they're doing know that. So they're going to make single malt, they're going to make rye, they're going to make blended whiskeys, they're going to do other things. And the innovation that we're seeing already is so exciting to me. My own current jam on American single malt is Cedar Ridge out of Iowa. Yeah. They're phenomenal. They've been doing it for years. I've known about them for years. They're now starting to, creep out of kind of the Iowa Midwestern area, starting to sell in a phenomenal. They've got great product. They've got great aged product. They're a winery. They're a distillery. They're working with local grains. They're doing everything right. So exciting. But you take their story and you can probably pick, 10, 12 other distilleries that are doing the same thing in their region. To me, that's what you need for an explosion of renaissance of that category. And then you look at all these other categories doing the same thing. I don't know. To me, it's as much as I love bourbon, the future is all these other categories.
I was looking because I had a bottle of the Cedar Ridge Quintessential around here, and I was trying to find it, and it's over behind the camera, so I'm not going to be able to grab it.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I've got mine right over there.
I think Clay really said it perfectly, though. I don't see bourbon being overtaken, but there's plenty of room for extensions, right? So American single malt is an extension of the American whiskey story. Rye whiskey is an extension. There are a lot of people who are making things like 4-grain whiskeys and wheat whiskeys and all kinds of different things. And I think really the story of the next 10 years is going to be really understanding these regional differences, right? So, I've been talking to a lot of folks in Colorado, and I'm learning all these crazy things that happen, when you're distilling and aging at a mile over sea level. A lot of people go out there and they're like, we know it's going to be different. And then they have, a fermenter explode and, shoot gooey, sticky rye grain everywhere. So it really, I'm interested to see what we learn from all these people out there who are just now getting established in these different locations, and what those regional differences, particularly in climate, are going to do to the products that, we're familiar with now. So I think that's really the story of the next 10 years in American whiskey.
I'm glad we separated that discussion about gooey, sticky rye grain from the videotape technology story from earlier.
Thanks for bringing that full circle, Mark.
Sorry. Graham Fraser, will there be federal rules introduced to regulate single malt like bourbon?
Yeah.
Yes, they're still coming. They were supposed to be out at the end of last month, and they still aren't here yet.
Yeah, the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission has been working toward that, and the last I heard, that is something that is definitely happening at this point.
Yeah, the TTB has it on the federal government's regulatory agenda. It was supposed to be out, or at least the draft regulations for public comment were supposed to be out at the end of December. They are not out yet, because the first thing I do every morning when I drag my butt out of bed is check the Federal Register to see if they're out yet. And they are not out. And we're up to January 28th. So,
Mark, honey, you can set a Google alert. It'll just tell you when it happens.
The difference between Google alerts and journalism is actually breaking the news when it happens, though.
That's true. But I think it would probably pick up the TTB website if they made any changes like that.
It wouldn't, because it's all in Google News. It's
oh, okay.
It would be in the. I would have to wait for somebody else to report it first, and I don't like that.
Oh, that's true. No, you're good with the scoops. I got to give you that.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, there's been a grand larceny here in the studio. I don't know if you heard that noise in the background, but
is your cat climbing your shelves?
No, one cat took over and knocked off a set of the Girl Scout cookies, the rest of those Toastiers, onto the floor, so that the other cat, and the dog could eat the rest of them. And you may have heard them just all skedaddling up the stairs with what's left of those Girl Scout cookies.
That is perfect.
See, they say dogs and cats hate each other.
No, this is where they all work together. The cats will knock stuff off the counter for the dog to eat, or for the dog to open. I kid you not. A couple of days ago, one of the cats knocked a jar of cat treats off the counter and pushed it over to the dog because he knew the dog would chew it open.
Yeah.
And open it for them.
They're so much smarter than we think they are.
Those little bastards are conspiring against us all the time.
Here's the thing. We can't talk to them, but very clearly they can talk to each other.
They understand us.
What?
Yeah.
Dogs and cats can
Oh,
converse.
yeah.
We don't know anything that goes on in that world.
No, we can talk to them, but that doesn't mean they listen.
About it, and I think it was pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. We ignore that at our own risk.
It's their world. We just get to live in it and feed them and serve them.
That's right.
Well, yeah.
And with that, it is time for me to go actually feed the dog and the cats now. So we will have to cut this off at an hour and 10 minutes of time that, once again, you will never get back in your life. We've managed to waste that for all of you.
We are so sorry that you had to listen to this. Just, wow. We went all over the map today, didn't we, guys?
I hope everybody else was drinking because I've enjoyed this.
And Christopher Malloy, yes, I am doing much better. Thank you. They wouldn't have left me alone if I hadn't been doing better. They trusted me with that. So I am doing much better, and thank you. So
we are all glad.
I also want to send a shout out to our thank you. I want to send a shout out to our pal Lilith down in Australia, who's fighting breast cancer now. We posted a message from her husband Chris earlier. Lilith, hang in there. We've got your back too, just like we have Steve and all of our other friends who are going through health problems. Sláinte, and stay strong. We got your back.
That's our Happy Hour Live webcast from the other night, Friday, January 28th, 2022, with my guests Clay Risen of the New York Times and Maggie Kimberl of American Whiskey Magazine. This Friday night, we have double the fun with 2 Happy Hour Live webcasts. Our original plan was to have the guys from the Off Track with Hinch and Rossi podcast for their annual off-season appearance. But there was a scheduling conflict with them at 5 o'clock New York time. They are available, though, at 5 p.m. West Coast time. So, James Hinchcliffe, Alexander Rossi, Tim Durham, and another mainstay of the IndyCar paddock, Marco Andretti, will join us at 8 p.m. New York time. Since that is a bit late for our viewers in Europe, Jeff Arnett will join me at our regular time of 5 o'clock New York time. Of course, Jeff was the longtime master distiller at Jack Daniel's before stepping down to join the new company distilling project that's under construction just outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Don't forget, next week on Friday the 11th, Maker's Mark Chairman Emeritus Bill Samuels Jr. will be my guest. Hope you can join us for those live shows, along with our regular WhiskyCast podcast each week. Once again, special thanks to Redbreast and Dewar's, our presenting sponsors, along with the segment sponsors on our weekly WhiskyCast podcasts, Mortlock, Catoctin Creek, Scarabus, Sagamore Spirit, The Dalmore, and Writer's Tears. WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.